Good evening. Or good night, I should say. It's about 2 in the morning. I've been awake for 3 hours, give or take. When I say awake, I've been up for 3 hours. When I'm in weird sleep cycles like I am now, I'll often get into conversations with people about my sleep patterns. You know, people are naturally curious, or concerned, or both. And how long have you been up? When did you wake up this morning? For me, waking up is not a I'm awake, let's get out of bed kind of deal. Unless I have somewhere to be or something to do, whether it be a social obligation, professional obligation, or otherwise. For the most part, however, when I wake up, I don't roll over, check the clock, or get out of bed. Most of the time, I try to just go back to sleep. It doesn't matter if I've been asleep for half an hour, 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours. Almost universally, my overwhelming desire is to not be awake. It's to be asleep. Go back into that place that isn't this place. Then today, or tonight, there's really no exception to that. I'd like to tell you about what I dreamt of. But truthfully, as is so often the case, it has largely escaped me. Detail by detail, piece by piece, what was once coherent and vibrant and clear has become shadowed, muddy, and opaque. I know I was with someone, or at least ended up with someone. I know the feeling of nails on skin and teeth on my shoulder. The kind of clawing desperation that is not perhaps uncommon, but is altogether still noteworthy. The prevailing feeling of that moment was not immersion in the moment, in the feeling, in the juxtaposition of sharp and soft. But in the unsureness, if I was experiencing a sensation or experiencing the memory of a sensation, and trying to differentiate whether it was the memory or the feeling. That had so captivated my attention. And upon waking, that same confusion or indetermination stayed with me. Whether it be in a dream or in reality, for whatever that's worth. That same conundrum, that same confusion, is something that I find frequented by. I find myself frequented by. Enjoyment of a situation, whether it be a smell, a taste, a feeling, and having this cool, detached awareness that the sensation itself is not where I'm deriving the pleasure or fulfillment from, but rather from the association I have with that sensation. I dated for a few overwhelmingly optimistic months. Someone by the name of Emily in college. I say dated. I'm not really sure that conveys what it was. I'm not sure I can clearly remember to convey what it was. It was wild infatuation. Fixation. Affection, and I suppose romance. But I bring her up because when we weren't together, the smell of her lingered with me. She smoked a lot. A lot. And before her, I had associated tobacco smoke, cigarette smoke with my father. And all of the complicated, frustrated associations that carried. I associated it with holding my breath in the car, even though the windows were rolled down, because I didn't want to breathe in something that was clearly documented as toxic. And I don't mean I did this as a young adult, I did this as a child. As a teenager. I recall at one point, when I had grown close to adulthood, my father asking me why I still did that. Why I still held my breath when he smoked. As if the answer weren't obvious. I'm not averse to danger. I'm not averse to risk. I'm not averse to pain. I can relish in it, flourish in it, and enjoy it vibrantly and excitedly, but it needs to be my choice. With Emily, somehow that same acrid, lingering stain of a smell became something where dopamine and serotonin lived. Pings of happiness, of want, of longing would take root. I can't before her remember a time where smell was such a thing for me to be fixated on in a relationship. And since, it hasn't been a thing either. In the short years following us breaking up, her moving away from this school that we both attended, And thinking back to that relationship, thinking back to how important of a connection that smell was. With horror, I slowly found that I could no longer remember what it smelled like. I could remember the words associated with it. I could remember the description that I would give of it if I were to write it down. And oh, I certainly did write it. But the visceral sensation, the memory, it's just a hole where something once was. Memory's funny like that. And by funny, I obviously mean deeply flawed and troubling. What gives us light one day and fulfillment and excitement and joy evaporates. And often it doesn't leave in its absence lingering want and need and desperation, though sometimes it does. Often it just leaves nothing but the distinct impression that there should be something here, though I can't quite remember what. At times, certainly, that feeling lends itself to quiet desperation, the slow growing of madness, a kind of temporal awareness of eventual mental decay. But I'm more touched, I think, with the stillness than I am the absence, if that distinction makes sense. I'm not good at letting myself get carried away in the moment. I can't dance. I'm stuck in my head, not in the fluidity of feet and hands and hips. Even under extraordinarily intoxicated situations, it's always this meta-cognitive sense, this self-awareness, this critique, this sharp-tongued voice of mine. If anything, being drunk makes it all the more insufferable. And that's to say nothing of other substances and effects. I think part of me wanted to find in substance use and abuse the sort of escape that I imagined other people got from it. Sort of joy, freedom, looseness, and fluidity that I had seen acted out around me. It didn't work that way for me. Sometimes I would lose inhibitions. Certainly. And sometimes in a way that made me feel like I was a better me because I did it. But I never really found that freedom. Right? I never really found that joy, that light, that floating feeling. What I found consistently was growing assuredness that I, in my natural sober state, was wrong, was sick, was broken, malformed, abnormal. And that I could mitigate that abnormality through medication. Self-medication. I liked so much that on Adderall, I felt like a smarter, sharper version of myself. And when drinking, I felt more confident, sexier, and to be fair, the lion's share of sexiness is confidence. At least so far as my taste goes. And it may have been true. That's the troubling thing. This troubling little doubt that, what if I was right? In our American culture, contemporary American culture, having any sort of mental or emotional variation to the prescribed norm is not condemned, not demonized exactly, but ostracized, certainly. And prescription is readily, excitedly handed out to minimize that deviation, to correct that misstep from the norm that had been prescribed. But the very act of relying on or indulging in a prescription is at the same time looked down upon and ostracized. You were ostracized for being sick. You were ostracized for seeking treatment. The quiet, unspoken preference is that you do not exist at all. That your abnormality, your lack of conformity, is a hindrance, an annoyance, and is merely tolerated by the prescribed norm and those who are more able to better perform it. So medication is something that, in part, you do for yourself, because sometimes you believe in this more healthy version of yourself, but more often, for me, the desire to do it came from a place of satisfying others, or more pointedly, to quiet the bias and bigotry of normalcy. To appear to conform, to appear to adhere to the norm. Not out of any desire to participate within it, but out of a desire to not be hurt by not conforming to it, by those who do conform to it. At times I've wished sincerely and wholly that I could record my dreams, share them, watch them back. And this fascination is something that I've had for long time. Since I was a child. The earliest dream I can remember was some facsimile adjacent to Dinotopia. I was a little boy in a cave, much like those of the world beneath. There was a underground river flowing through the cave, and on either side of this cave that had been carved out by centuries of flow of water, on either side were worn walking paths, elevated from the water by 3 to 5 feet. The sediment was brown, reddish, like that of the Southwest. Sandstone. If my little brain at that time knew even what sandstone was. Or if this is just an example on iteration of a memory. I was walking with a Gallimimus. Though I think at that time I didn't quite know how tall they were. So let's say it was adolescent too. And it was my friend. He was my friend. I can't remember his name. Or his coloration. I want to say orange. Orangish. But truthfully, I can't remember. And by torchlight, candlelight, firelight, that sort of warm light, though neither of us held a torch or a candle or fire, we wandered through this space together. And the cave wasn't cold, dark, or scary. It wasn't a tomb of the earth, it was a passageway. One that was warm and thrilling, exciting, full of mystery and possibility. I don't remember what came before that moment, and I don't remember what came after that moment. But that moment, I remember. And the fascination with dreams, I think, started there. Early on particularly, there was this desire to get back to that place, or to other places that I dreamt of. This fascination and fixation with lucid dreaming, with control and navigation of this meta-cognitive space, this otherworldly dimension. Yeah, I read a lot of nonsense. I'd want to call it pseudoscientific, but it didn't verge on the scientific. I'd call it spiritual, but it really makes mockery of the radiance of spirituality. Sleep sciences, the idea of astral projection. And I wanted so badly for it to be real, for it to be true, for this to be some sort of hidden door like that of Narnia that I could poke through and discover a whole hidden side of the universe on the other end. And I think quietly that hope has never quite died. Quietly, I still find myself, when I can't be with someone, hoping that we'll meet again in dreams. Or that when I dream of them, they're dreaming of me, and it isn't just some fantasy, but we are there, together, sharing in that moment. I can only imagine how much worse that fixation and feeling might get once I start losing people who I love. You know, there are traditions in different cultures and different histories of shamans, mystics, spiritualists who can speak to people across distance and time, life and death. And really, that's what this quiet part of me aspires to. I want to believe. I want to have faith in that. I want it to be real. Because it would just be so magical if it were. But it isn't. I'm thoroughly convinced that it isn't. And it's heartbreaking that it isn't. Still, if I could record a dream and share it with someone else, I think I'd like to do that. Because it would turn this internalized landscape of feelings, associations, and non-conscious, subconscious, and even conscious narrative forming, this private art, if you will, this private creative space and exploratory space into something that could be shared. And if it can be shared, it can be studied and critiqued and criticized. And certainly it would be. It's still, despite the inherent harm and risk and maybe foolishness of that, it's still tempting. Still wildly tempting. I'd like to be able to roll back the tape, as it were, and look once again into the eyes of whoever it was that I dreamt of. Whatever it was I dreamt of. Because I want to know, really, concretely, what it is I dream of. Not just what it is I think I dream of, and who it is I think I dream of, and the little editorial notes I make every time I think upon a memory or bring up a memory. Because, unfortunately, we do. We change a memory every time we think of it. Because we can't not. We're so good, clever little creatures at forming narratives and creating narratives where they don't exist, that we even do it where narratives did exist, and smooth things out and edit them and make them conform more to our understandings of what's true and not true, possible and impossible. Or comfortable and uncomfortable, even. Cognitive dissonance is a hell of a thing. I want to know if the eyes I looked into were really full of the same vibrancy that I remember feeling, or if all there was that feeling. that feeling and the void. That in dreams, particularly dreams of loves and lovers, of dalliances and rendezvous, with all that passion and heat and fire, sharp and soft, this want for a replay is full of hope that there is another actor, another player, another mind there, but I think the truth of the matter is that it's just a mirror. It's me and the void. It's me and nothing. What I felt is what I wanted to feel. What I experience is what I want to experience. Right, and that's really not all that outlandish of a of a theory. But why then would we dream of things that are unpleasant? I was debilitated by nightmares as a child. Same nightmares, night after night after night. Some of them, even now, thinking back on, send shivers up my spine. The kind of irrational, hormone-pumping fear that only your amygdala can kick you into. Ghostly voice singing The Yellow Rose of Texas as I searched desperately for where it came from. This haunting feeling that there was something up above me in the dark looking down as I walked through this century-old wooden building full of creaking boards, rotting stairs, and abandoned hallways, looking for someone that I loved, and only finding this growing cold shiver. It's something sharp, full of teeth and hunger and cold disdain watched me. And it sang to me. A hollow, sweet, beautifully haunting voice. Why would I have wanted that? Why on earth would I have wanted that dream? So maybe it's not that simple, huh? Maybe it is. Part of the appeal of learning to lucid dream, or at least aspiring to, was to control these nightmares. To be able to wake up on a whim. To have control over this one tiny aspect of my life, this one most fanciful and ungrounded aspect of my life. Largely, I think I've succeeded. Though I still have nights of night paralyses, waking from a dream into a dream into a dream in that infinite mind blindingly bending cascade. Waking up from life into life into life into life. Seeing homes I've had or could have, lives I've had or could have, if only one thing had been different, if only one thing had changed. Those dreams, I think, bother me the most. Because as I cascade, trying desperately to wake, unsure if I had really woken up, I can't help but wonder what worlds it is that I'm seeing. The unimaginably complex and detailed facsimiles of a sleeping mind, or glimpses into alternate timelines and realities. And in dark moments when I do finally awaken to this life, this quiet, heartbreaking question of why it was that I had to wake up into this one. Why couldn't I have stopped at any of those other realities along the way? Why did I have to be this Alex, at this place, at this time? Question full of hurt. Wanting. Yeah. Dreams are kind of wonderful. They're obviously a incredibly cerebral experience. I've dreamt of the ending of the world in myriads of ways. I've dreamt of catastrophe and death. I've dreamt of my own suffering and torture on numerous occasions. Teeth falling out. Yes, I have fallen victim to that dream too on many occasions. Dreamt of Superman speaking Russian. I've dreamt of things ridiculous and mundane. Dreaming is maybe one of the most fantastic things of my life, if not the most fantastic. Now, we talk about cinema, we talk about books, we talk about games as being portals into other worlds and being fantastic, amazing, epic. But so rarely can any of them hold a candle to the flame of dreams. Which makes it all the more strange that so often, despite ourselves, we can't remember them. We can't hold on to them. And there's some cold, dark, haunting fear as to the unanswered why. This is a nice way to wake up. Truth be told. Wake up, look online, find that statues of Theodore Roosevelt and Abraham Lincoln have been torn down. Not even being shocked or surprised in the least by the news. It's raining. It's a still, quiet night. It's beautiful, really. I don't have it in myself to care about things that get me angry. Not yet. Not yet. Maybe I'll get there, but not right now. I just want to sit in the dark for a little bit longer. To hold on to the slowly slipping tendrils of dreaming as they slowly fade through recollection, decaying at my very touch. One of the most beautiful dreams I've ever had was one where I was convinced that I was dying. I wasn't ill. I wasn't in pain. I wasn't even cold. I was that kind of cold where you're not shivering anymore. Sharp and cool and quick. I felt like steel more so than ice. I was home. And home in that dream meant that I was somewhere in a mountain range. Oh, it snowed. The sky was clouds. Gentle white specks created a magnificent haze. Honestly, I couldn't tell you if it was sunny or dark, day or night, in that kind of magical way that snow up north does, or snow in the midst of winter does. Part of me was convinced I was in the Alps, though I couldn't tell you why. Just this feeling. The house I was in was hardwood. And steel. With glass. Kind of modernist fantasy, I suppose. The wall, the most important wall, the wall that I faced and looked out onto this cascade of mountains, snow, valleys, a clouded sky. It was glass. Ceiling to floor windows. The kind that don't have the reservation of even considering privacy. And that pinnacle of privilege and power where you occupy a space and know assuredly you don't share it. And you won't share it. The room was warm, though I couldn't feel it. A long table lined the glass wall, filled with odds and ends, bits and bobs, as so often my tables do. And honestly, I don't think I ever looked hard enough at any of them to give them true shape and form and meaning. It was clutter. Sensible clutter, but clutter. I had the feeling that off to my left, through a doorway in that wooden wall, was a kitchen. And off behind me to the left was a bathroom with a stand-in shower that was more of a thing of recreation than a thing of cleaning. Multiple shower heads coming from different directions, a sauna and a shower of a room more so than an appliance in a room, though I never set foot in it. Off to my right was another glass wall, though outside of this one was much darker, as if in shadow from something. Maybe the house. It didn't draw my eye. Behind me, almost directly, was the front door. I think. Or at least the door into this room proper, from where I couldn't tell you whether it be a hallway, a foyer, or the blistering cold of the outside world. It didn't really matter. It was a door. And the idea of a door. In the room with me, behind me, to my right as I looked out across this snow-laden, beautiful abyss, was a woman. A woman that I loved and knew dearly. Tan skin, dark eyes, dark hair. And at the time, I knew her name. Now, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't even give you the first letter. I've so thought about and returned to this dream that it's frayed. Time and time again, ripped and torn and taped back together, trying to maintain the landscape at the price of the profile. She sat and lay and walked around a recessed bed in the floor, full of pillows and blankets. A circular one with no determinate head or foot, which, upon more critical consideration might not make for the best bed, but in the dream it certainly did. It's interesting that it was set into the ground like a tomb or a crypt or a cairn. Now, I know that there are beds like that, and I'd very much like to have one. We didn't talk. We didn't kiss, we didn't touch. But she was there, and I knew she loved me. And I knew that I loved her. And I felt very much at peace with the idea that all of this was going to fade away. That all of this would end. And it would end soon. I had no desperate thoughts of escape, of consumption, of activity. I was content to stand and watch and wait. And the fullness of this exception, the satisfaction of it, has stuck with me. I don't understand people who don't hold dreams near and dear to their heart. It frightens me when I talk to people who say that they don't like dreaming. They don't remember their dreams. It breaks my heart when people talk about their dreams being full of nightmares to the point that they self-medicate in order to not dream, or at least not remember the dream. To me, that's more terrifying. The idea of something horrible happening, whether it just be a nightmare or not, night after night after night, and not remembering it. Something deeply disturbing about that. Deeply traumatic about that. Yeah. Getting better at controlling and remembering your dreams comes in a few simple steps. When you wake up, write it down. Write down whatever you dreamed about as much as you can. If it helps, you can start out with bullet points. This happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And then fill in those gaps. What happened in between? What happened in between? What happened in between? And what you're doing when you're doing that is partially you're remembering. And partially you're fabricating. But hopefully in the fabrication there's some facsimile or reflection of the truth. Reflection of the feeling that you're trying to remember and trying to hold on to. And really, that's the best any of us can aspire to. The second thing is think in your waking life, am I dreaming? Be conscious and intentional about your consumption and perception of the world around you. In dreams, you can't read. You really can't. If you think that you're reading words, what you're really doing is you're processing the idea of reading words. If you look at the text itself for long enough, normally it gets jumbly, the words don't actually fit together well. Using electronic devices can get really confusing and frustrating. Like, you keep typing in the same word over and over, but it doesn't come out right. Like, autocorrect keeps on fucking it up. And that's because a lot of the time we know how things are supposed to work, but we don't know how they work. And so when we construct them or reconstruct them in our dreams, they're always not quite right. A simple test is just flicking a light switch. Because sometimes in dreams, something even as simple as that won't work. Now, of course, yeah, your power could be out. Right? Don't assume that just because a light switch didn't work or took a second too long that you're not in the real world. But there are lots of little steps and tricks that you can do. Some people swear by the idea of trying to manifest something. A red ball is one I've heard a few times. I really got the trick of that myself. But there are times when I know that I'm dreaming that I don't actively focus on it, because the realization that I'm asleep or I'm dreaming can be impetus enough to kick me into the waking world, to wake me up. And sometimes I just push back that revelation and that understanding to the quiet recesses of my mind and go, not yet. Not yet. This is okay for now. I'll often fly in dreams, not freely. Sometimes it's through this same sort of finding a seam in the laws of the universe, finding an exception, or finding an unspoken doorway that has always been there and has always been possible, but you need to linger in moments and spaces and possibilities where you're encouraged not to. Like, in the midst of jumping, when you reach the pinnacle of a jump, that feeling of force underneath you slowly reaching equilibrium with the force pulling you down. Staying in that feeling, in that moment. And by concentrating, well, not concentrating, but by being that feeling, by being in that, you know, the Tao of that moment, the Tao of that feeling, being in the way of that thing, you're given flight. Not flight, but levitation? Weightlessness? No, you still have weight, but it's controlled. Jumping further and further, farther and farther. Slowing your fall bit by bit to the point where I take a running jump off of a tree with an absurdly large leaf, using that to help slow my fall, and I find that using air currents, I'm weightless and I can just float on forever. I can come down if I want to, but I don't have to. A purely cognitive world is an oddly beautiful thing. It can be terrifying, too. But in dreaming, maybe the most important thing to remember is you are the only one in there. It's all you. The monster that's chasing you, that disembodied voice that's haunting you. It's just you. It's not some disembodied part of you. It's not some other inner self you need to demonize and exorcise. It's just you. It's you experiencing fear and being afraid. And if you're calm, you can step out of it. And yes, on the other hand, that means that lover, that incredible way, that incredibly romantic or passionate exchange, it's just you. It's a little masturbatory. And by that I mean it's entirely masturbatory, but that's okay. When you're fighting someone and you can't throw that punch, or you're just too slow, you're only fighting yourself. You don't need to hit them to have power there. You don't need to hurt yourself to have power there. You already do. You're already in control. And maybe if you feel out of control, it's because you want to. You want to make sense of that feeling, that terrible, powerless feeling. You want to find a way to escape that powerless feeling. A way to avoid it in the future. Now, we use dreams in lots of different ways for escape, for fantasy. But we also use it to teach ourselves and to train ourselves. To try to better and prepare ourselves for the world we have to wake up to. I'm incredibly grateful for dreaming. I think with that, I'm probably good to call it a day here. It hasn't been quite an hour, but it doesn't really matter, does it? We hit 10 minutes, if we hit an hour, if it's 5 hours. Ultimately, I'm doing this for my satisfaction, sense of mind, and enjoyment. Though, you know, there's obviously an appeal to an audience, particularly to specific members of that audience, but all the same, it's quite nice to just set out, do this, not have a particular landmark or objective in mind. Failure to plan may be a plan to fail, but if you don't conceive of success and failure in the outset, all you have is the experience. I'm sure I'll upload something. Well, I have stuff queued to be uploaded for the next week and a half. I'd like to be streaming, though, you know, I'm still lacking inspiration on that account. We'll see what happens. Until tomorrow, I'm gonna say toodaloo. Take care. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.